Hey everybody, I'm David Page. This is Culinary Characters Unlocked, and on this episode, you've heard of farm to table. How about sea to table? I'm talking with Chef David Standridge of the Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic, Connecticut, who's just won the 2024 James Beard Award as Best Chef in the Northeast. Chef, thanks for doing this. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm terrific. Let me start with congratulations for your James Beard Award as Best Chef in the Northeast. How's that feel?
It feels amazing. I didn't think I would ever win a James Beard Award. So it was pretty great to get up there and do the whole thing, and really more great to get the attention on what we're doing, which is so important to keep doing it.
Well, what are you doing?
Mostly, we're a restaurant in Mystic, Connecticut, the southeast coast of Connecticut that focuses on local, sustainable seafood, sort of as we define it. And local being landed within 10 or 15 miles of the restaurant exclusively, and everything's wild, nothing farmed, and everything is sustainably caught.
Which means what?
It means that I like to always fall back to, obviously, sustainability is an overused term, but to the actual definition of the word, which is something that you can keep doing indefinitely without damaging the surrounding environment. So basically, the way we determine the level of sustainability is we use a program called Smart Catch that we send in every 6 months, every piece of seafood that we purchased, where it was caught and how it was caught. And then they do an audit and they send it back to us, and they basically say, okay, these are all good. Maybe this one here, you should do something different. And I think on last count, we were 99.7% sustainable.
What'd you screw up on?
We have some disagreements on some things. There are some methods that they don't consider sustainable. Like, they're basically going on like the Monterey Bay Smart or Seafood Watch standards. We disagree on fish pots, although they've changed their ruling on fish pots because of, I think, maybe my arguments, I'd like to think.
What are fish pots?
Fish pots are fish traps. So basically, they don't look terribly different from lobster traps, but they're suspended in the water. Fish go in, you pull up the trap, and then you've got a bunch of fish. The reason they are frowned upon is because of the right whale population, and there's a potential, just like lobster traps, for whales to get caught in the gear. But that can only possibly happen if you put them, one, where whales go, and two, you leave them there. And the people that I get fish from that use fish pots put them out, and they come back in a half an hour, and they pull them up, and then they take them with them when they go. So it's probably the most sustainable thing because they're pulling live fish out of there. So if it's a fish that's too small, they can throw it back. If it's a fish they don't want, they can throw it back and it's unharmed. Whereas, when you pull up in a net, they're dead.
There's been, I guess still is, in the minds of many people, a huge crisis in the way we are sourcing seafood throughout the world. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Mostly, that's not an American problem. I think we look at a lot of Smart Catch, for instance, is very globally focused on the global fishing stocks. And in the United States, we manage our fisheries very, very well. There's quotas they're assessed every year. We understand the pot, generally speaking, it's always behind, unfortunately, but we understand how much of each species there are to some degree and the health of the fishing stocks. And we do a good job. Like everything else, there are the good players like us and the not so good players like China and Russia and to some extent Japan who don't do the right thing.
They just overfish?
Yep.
Or they farm them badly, or what?
Well, there's bad farming. There's not a lot of good farming, quite frankly. But
how? Define that. What makes it bad farming?
My view is that large scale, particularly salmon farming, large scale open water salmon farming is never good.
Why?
Because the fish escape, you're putting all this stuff into the water, you're adding antibiotics a lot of times, and you're adding it to the ecosystem. So those things are just not good for the surrounding area. Whether or not the trade-off is worth it is not something that I can decide. But there's better ways to do that and not so good ways to do that. And so I think that, I can't judge all salmon farms. Some are better than others, but certainly the systems that we have in place to monitor seafood stocks, countries like China don't go by those rules. That's where we kind of get this fish are overfished idea, but it's not really true nationally. In America, we have plenty of fish. We export 6 million pounds of seafood a year and we import 5 million.
How'd you get here? Were you one of those kids who was always in the kitchen cooking with mom or dad?
Yeah.
Early on?
Yeah, I started cooking. I was telling my son this because he's 4 and he doesn't do this. But I used to get up when I was 4 years old and make my own breakfast before my parents were awake and turn on the TV. And, I learned my mother always just had me cooking with her when we did cooking, whether it was pancakes or whatever. And then, Gen X, both my parents worked. There was no daycare. So at some point I was home by myself in the summers and I wanted things. And I was watching whatever was on TV, which somehow ended up on cooking shows. And I was like, this is cool. Like, I can make pasta. I can make my own cake. This is amazing. So I just started doing it. And I loved doing it. I had good role models. My dad cooked all the meals. My mom had a bigger job. So when I was very little, it was my mom. And then through the rest of my life, it was my dad. We were just a cooking family, I guess.
And what was food around the house? What were the favorites?
The big meals that I loved were, I also, funnily enough, was an extremely picky eater. I was tell people I didn't really eat a vegetable until I was 25, willingly. And then I was vegetarian for a year. I just kind of went. But it was, roasted chicken, simple things. My mom used to make chicken and dumplings. My father's from a Southern family, so there was like a little bit of that influence there. Pancakes on Sundays. My mother's Italian, so we always had like the Sunday sauce and the meatballs and sausages. It was kind of a lot of different things.
And at what point did you say to yourself, I could do this for a living?
I did everything else first. Quite frankly, I worked in food service when I was a teenager.
Which means what?
Well, I grew up in a town in New Jersey that had an amusement park and a ski area. It was Action Park, which is somewhat famous for being the world's most dangerous water park or something like that. There's a documentary about it. It was a crazy place. I really liked it. I was a shy kid. And I think when you are shoved into a kitchen with people, you're working next to them, you're forced to make friends and talk. So I liked the camaraderie of it. And I enjoyed cooking. But I was smart. So school was not pushing me towards a trade. School was pushing me towards college. So I went to college. I tried to be a writer. That did not work out very well. I worked in publishing. I worked on boats. I did a little bit of accounting. I tried everything really, except for cooking. And then I kind of fell into cooking when I was about 26.
And how did you fall into cooking?
I ended up working at 11 Madison Park. I opened 11 Madison Park in 1998 as a reservationist. And that was probably my first exposure to real restaurants because Danny Meyer gave everybody a monthly gift certificate basically to dine at any of the restaurants. So that was my first exposure to real food, And then I ended up dating and marrying someone there who was like a big time restaurant person at the time, who I'm no longer married to. But she really introduced me to food and beverage in a real way. She was like the first woman who ever worked in Boulé. So she was like, kind of knew everybody. And then I ended up working in the front of the house. I transitioned into like being a bartender, kind of like lied my way into a bartending job and learned that trade. And then I was working for Kurt Gutenbrenner at Walsey in the West Village as a bartender. And what I realized was that what I really loved about bartending was the making of stuff, and dealing with the people was not so much my forte. So I realized also that was happening in the kitchen. And I saw that what was happening was really cool. And also just the weirdness of the kitchen attracted me.
Well, hold on. Explain that.
Well, I don't know why, but just like all the crazy stuff that was happening in kitchens, I was like, I want to be in the crazy place. That's just probably a sickness in me, maybe, I don't know. But I remember there was this one incident during the middle of service at Walsey where there was a Japanese garde manger cook and a Senegalese dishwasher. And the dishwasher kept putting hot plates where the cold plates were supposed to go. And the guy told him like 3 times, don't do it, stop. And cold plates on top. And he did it again. And so the guy threw his cleaver at him in the middle of service.
Probably not the best move.
Not the best move. So what ensued was a fist fight in the kitchen. And Kurt was in the dining room at the time. And the sous chef managed, and the rest of the team managed to take those guys downstairs, settle the fight, get them back up, working, and without the restaurant missing a beat. And I just felt like this was just these amazing things that happened. And I just want to be part of the insanity.
It's interesting you mentioned that because so many people in the industry wax rhapsodic about the environment. But over the last few years, there's kind of been a reckoning in some respect. I mean, Mario Batali is a perfect example. Yeah. You saw that on the way up. Mm-hmm. Is it truly getting better?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it couldn't get worse. That's for sure. I think that I saw it working. I worked for Robuchon, and that was a very intense kitchen early on with chefs who came from different places where standards were different.
You're talking about the French brigade system.
Yeah, the brigade system, and I think just in general, the idea that it's kind of militaristic, whether or not you have those stations or not. And, there was definitely like some physical abuse, there's verbal abuse, there's like all these things are happening. And I think it wasn't always bad in the sense that I think people were signing up for that. But I think that it's way better now. I think for me, coming out of that environment, it took me a long time to get out of that and realize like, I don't want to be that chef.
Personally, I mean, were you?
I was never abusive, but when I came out of that, I felt like it was as a chef, I always felt like if your cooks aren't a little scared of you, you're not going to get the best out of them. Whether or not like you ever yell or scream or anything, but if I always felt like if you walk on the line and your cooks don't tighten up, then you're not going to be a good chef. And I don't think that, and now I think the opposite. Now I think maybe it's that cooks have changed, but I realize that if I walk on the line and my cooks tighten up, then that's not how I get the best work out of them. I want my cooks to relax when I'm there and realize everything's going to be fine. It's just a different way.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Vernon, New Jersey, which is the very northern tip.
Well, I'm in southern Jersey, so for you, is it pork roll or Taylor ham? I'm trying to remember which.
It's Taylor ham.
Taylor ham up there, pork roll down here.
Yeah.
You grew up in Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
You went to cooking school in Texas?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah. Well, I married a Texan.
Well, there you go.
So that's what happened, essentially. So yeah, that's how I got there.
Is Houston where you started cooking professionally?
Yeah. After working at Walsey, we moved to Texas, first to Austin, then I hated Austin. We moved up to Houston. I didn't really at that point, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was looking for kitchen jobs, and I found a great culinary school there that was just cooking. I'd already been to college. I didn't need all that crap. So it was an amazing school at the time. And then I started working at the Four Seasons
Hotel.
Yep.
And how'd you get to New York?
We just hated,
I've lived in Houston. It's okay. It's humid.
I liked Houston. Yeah. It's a great food town, honestly. It's one of the best food cities in New York, in the country.
Well, because of the port. When I lived there
Exactly.
many years ago, because of the ship channel, it was a much more international city than Dallas, for example.
Yeah, even than San Francisco. You've got so many influences. So yeah, because you've got Cajun, you've got barbecue, you've got the huge Vietnamese population, you have Italian. There's like every ethnicity of food, plus all the real Mexican food. I think it's really cool. But New York has always just been home. I love New York City. We went back to New York City right after September 11th. Just felt like I needed to be there. We just couldn't really stay away. And that's for food. Was at that time, at least, the place to be if you want to be a chef.
Is it still?
I don't think so.
Where's it happening more than New York?
I don't think that it's anywhere in particularly more. Maybe LA. And there's certainly amazing things happening in New York. But I've always felt like there's this idea that everything flows out of New York. And the reality is, it's just that all the journalists live in New York. So they're writing about these amazing things that are happening in New York that are also happening all over the place.
So you're in New York, you're cooking at Joël Robuchon's place, 2 Michelin stars. Did that change you in any way?
Yes. I don't know if it changed me, but I learned when I first got to Robuchon, I thought I was a hotshot cook because I was the best cook where I was in Texas. And I was so total fish out of water. I had to learn everything over again.
What kinds of things did you have to learn over again? What were you as a professional chef doing wrong?
It wasn't that I didn't know how to make things. My technique was really good. It was just the system and the tempo and just how things worked. When I finally got on the line there, I was like an idiot. And actually, mostly it was mostly the eyes. I remember the chef like physically grabbing me, and I would make a plate, and he would grab me, bring me into the office, which was right around the corner, and pull up a picture of the dish of where it was supposed to look, and be like, can you make it like that? And I would look at it and see no difference. I'd be like, what are you talking about? And it was that the garnish was like just a little off. But after working there, I could walk through the kitchen and see that from 5 feet away. It's just seeing it.
Well, can you enforce, and maybe enforce is the wrong word, but can you bring Michelin 2-star standards to your place in Connecticut?
What I did when I left there is I went the total other direction into casual restaurants. And the way I tried to do that is I do a lot of that work myself after the cooks are done. So I make the cooks' jobs pretty simple, where they're cooking the proteins, they're putting maybe 2 things on the plate, and then they give it to me and I do the rest before it goes out.
Wait a second. Aren't you supposed to delegate?
Yes, but like the pass, a lot of restaurants, like the pass station is you're really just sending food. You know, you're like, oh, tell the runners where to go, or maybe one little garnish. But for us at our restaurant, it's not always me. Sometimes my sous chef or whatever, or sometimes the cooks can even work that station.
But you're the last tweezers on the plate.
Yep, and for some plates, it's 5 things. There could be 5 moves that happen once I get it before it goes out.
Well, explain that to me. Give me an example. So what dish comes to you and what do you have to do to it?
So like we do a dry aged duck. And basically, they take the duck, they put it on the plate sliced, and they put like the duck fried rice on the plate. Then it comes to me, and it gets the chili garlic, it gets the pickled blackberries, it gets the sauce, it gets the fried duck skin, and it gets the herbs, the herb garnish. So that's a lot of moves. And that also, if they did all that, they could never go fast enough. And if they did all that, by the time it got to me, it wouldn't look good. So, and also the other thing that I do it that way is because it forces the person on the pass to touch every single plate. You can't walk away from the pass. It's a station. So the chef can't be downstairs and food go out. They have to be, either it's me or someone else, but we have to be there to touch every single plate that goes out. And that really helps.
How often do you have to send something back?
Not very often. Honestly, my team is really good.
Well, how do you find a team that's that good, especially when you're doing something most places don't do?
It really takes forever. My experience here and actually at other restaurants too is it takes about, well, we had the pandemic, so that slowed everything down. But to me, it takes about 1 to 2 years to get the people, to find the people that are really the right people.
You mean 1 to 2 years after you've hired them to find out if they've worked, or 1 to 2 years?
Oh, no, they don't last that long if they're not the right people. I think we went through like 50 cooks in a year.
Wow.
Which is crazy, of a team of maybe 10.
Well, but given how cooking in the theoretical has become cool, everyone thinks they can do it because everyone has a kitchen. Why is it difficult to find talented cooks? Is it money?
No, I mean, at that point, honestly, especially after the pandemic, my interview process was, okay, I meet you. You said you know how to cook. Great. Let's come in and do a trail. Okay, you did okay. How much do you want? Essentially. And if somebody said 25, I would say sold. You know, I was so desperate for cooks, there was no negotiation there at all. Now maybe I'm at the point where I could name a number.
Okay, so you're in New York, you're doing hotshot cooking. You look up one day and say, to hell with this, let's go to Connecticut?
No, first I had a child. And that was like an existential crisis.
In what way?
Well, before that, I mean, just to describe my work life, when I was opening Cafe Clover, is when I met my now wife. I would get to work at 8 a.m. I would get out at midnight, not 5 days a week. At that point, it was 7 days a week. And then we would go out on our date at midnight until maybe 3 or 4 a.m. And then I would be back at work at 8.
So you'd get a solid 3 hours sleep. What the hell?
Solid 3 hours sleep, no problem. And I just was like, I can't have a kid in this environment. Like, I can never do it. Can do both.
And somehow being the guy who owns the restaurant, well, did you own Cafe Clover?
No.
Okay, so being the guy that owns the restaurant seemed to you to be less work?
No, I didn't. Well, I'm a partner here now, but we definitely have a lot of support. It's not just me. But what I did is go into catering for a year. Thinking I can do this. It was 9 to 5. It was very easy. And we did some crazy stuff, but it was just, and I did it for a year with our first child, and then I was kind of bored. And I started to realize, maybe we could do this. And then I got an opportunity here that kind of came out of the blue. And I was like, well, it'll be easy because it's not New York.
Is it easy because it's not New York?
No.
So tell me the ethos of the restaurant.
The ethos basically is that we want to be sustainable in every way that we can be. Really, for us, the focus is seafood. And it just happened because I got here. I did not intend to open this as a restaurant. It was my idea. I got here and I started looking into seafood. I thought I could get everything that I want. It turns out I can't. And that kind of just led me down the road of realizing the biggest problem around seafood here and just trying to help, honestly. So we became a restaurant that is really focused on local sustainable seafood and using invasive species and just kind of using the venue of a restaurant to try to help improve the food system.
That is, and I don't mean this in any demeaning way, that's a very lofty global goal.
I guess.
And you mentioned sustainability a lot, but you got the James Beard Award for the quality of your food. So how do I say this? What's more important?
It's hard to answer that question because they're equally important to some degree, but I would say that the benefit that we're doing to the community is the most important thing.
Which is what?
One, that we're supporting the local community. These are farmers and fishermen that need support. Fishing community in Connecticut is completely decimated. You can only fish for a few things, and there's very little of it that you're allowed to catch.
Why?
Because we don't have a lot of share of the national quotas, because we don't have a lot of coastline. We do, but we don't have a lot of territorial waters. So fishermen here are better off fishing in another state. So the fishing industry here is pretty depleted. And then the bigger picture of like consolidation of seafood production into larger companies where fishermen are getting squeezed out and taken advantage of, just a boatload of problems, no pun intended. But at the end of the day, the local fishermen really need help. And they need people to buy their fish at higher prices. And they need them to buy the fish that they can catch.
So are you buying straight off? I mean, you have a relationship with the guys who literally take the boats out.
Yeah, so there's only certain ways I can do that legally. So there's not any commercial fisherman can't just come and sell me fish.
Well, explain that. What happens? How does it work?
It's kind of stupid when you think about it, that you can't just buy fish off a boat for a restaurant, but they have to have either a special license to sell directly, or they also have to be licensed as a distributor. Like my main kind of westerly guy who is in the process of starting a co-op, which would be really great.
That's where the fishermen get together and merge their
and they'll basically all work through his license, so they'll be able to sell direct.
By focusing only on what you can get where you are, does that limit your ability to make great meals in some way?
No, not at all. I think to me, and this is maybe a little bit personal to how I work, if you put me in an environment where I could get anything, like New York, quite frankly, I don't think I did my best work in New York, because I would call distributors and say, well, what's good? And they'd be like, well, everything. What can I get? Well, anything. I'm like, well, I don't even know where to start now. I prefer to work with some limitations, and I like that I get a boat that comes in and they bring me 100 pounds of fish and it's all different. And I've got to figure out how to make that all work on the menu. That's where I do my best work.
Is that a daily occurrence, like what's available today?
Oh, it's a constant occurrence. I'm constantly texting the person who runs the docks here and what's coming in, what boats are going out, is there tuna in the future, like what's happening. And then my other fisherman, basically that's just the deal I have with him, where he goes fishing, tells me when he's going. I'll be like, 100 pounds would be great. And then he brings me fish. I don't know what it is until he's on his way here.
And then you must have a I was going to use the word Rolodex. That shows how old I am.
Kind of, yeah, totally.
You must have a computer file of the recipes that go with the fish you are most likely to get there. So it's not...
For sure.
Yeah.
It's not like anything. There's only 5 or 6 species of fish that we're going to get.
Well, what are they?
Fluke scup, black bass are primaries. Monkfish is one that I can kind of always get, so we do use a lot of monkfish.
Is that the one they call poor man's lobster?
Yeah, and then the kind of more harder to get ones are sea robin, which I would like to get more of.
What is a sea robin?
Sea robin is, it's also called red gunnard. If you've ever been fishing for really anything.
No, I throw up over the side of the boat.
Yeah. They're weird looking fish. They have this weird face. They have these big fins that they use to kind of go along the floor to feel for food. And they're just considered a garbage fish. Like, you catch them, you throw them back. That's it.
Bottom feeder.
Well, fluke are bottom feeders. We all love fluke. Halibut's the bottom feeder. We love halibut. It's just that I don't know why they're not sought after. Maybe it's the meat to bone ratio or something, but they're delicious. It's one of my favorite fish, bar none, to eat, but it's just not targeted. It's considered bycatch.
Bycatch is stuff you're not looking for.
Exactly. It's the extra stuff that you catch, which usually goes either in the garbage or goes, if you're doing a trawl or pulling up a gill net that's been out for a week, the fish in it might not still be alive. So you pull it up and you've got now the fish you want, that's great, 100 pounds of that. And then you've got 100 pounds of fish you don't want, that's dead.
And it just goes back into the water.
Some people dump it back in the water. Sometimes they sell it for bait. They'll just go into barrels on the deck and they'll let it kind of rot. And they sell it to lobster guys for bait or something like that.
Now, your focus on local and sustainable goes beyond fish, correct?
Yeah, we try to do as much as we can with vegetables. It's harder because we spend so much energy on fish. Honestly, that's really the focus. But we use a lot of local vegetables. We try to support local pig farm and obviously sugar kelp, which is not fish, but comes from the sea. That's a big product for us.
What is?
Sugar kelp.
Oh, well, reading up on you, there was a magazine headline on a story about you that was, quote, with a little kelp from your friends.
Yeah, we liked the Beatle references with kelp work really well. So we have these t-shirts with kelp on them, but it's kelp.
Is kelp good?
Yes, it's delicious and it's versatile and it's good for you. It's actually, my kelp farmer used it as a
Hold on.
essentially.
There's a kelp farmer?
Oh yeah, kelp is widely cultivated. So it started all in Connecticut. It actually started in Connecticut. Sugar kelp is native to the Long Island Sound. That's where it grows naturally. And then they started cultivating it as a crop. I don't remember when, maybe probably in the 80s or 90s. But it's become very popular. There's a whole kelp cooperative here. Stonington Kelp Farms is just a couple miles away. Susie Flores is the farmer there with her husband. She actually used kelp as a prenatal vitamin when she was pregnant with her last child because it has all the things in prenatal vitamins. It's super good for you, especially for women. And it also takes a ton of carbon out of the atmosphere.
What about your place attracts customers? I mean, who comes to eat with you? Is everybody wearing Birkenstocks and trying to save the world? Or are these just hungry people?
No, just hungry people by and large. I think now, honestly, that we've seen a shift since the James Beard Award where people are coming here for what we're trying to do. But for the last 4 years, we were doing what we were doing in spite of what people wanted. You know, people want lobster rolls, steak, and like fried seafood when they come to Mystic. That's what they're looking for. And I've had people write reviews about, oh, I thought you were a seafood restaurant and you didn't have haddock and you didn't have, baked clams and blah, blah, blah. And this place stinks, essentially,
Yes. Thank you, Yelp.
Yes, exactly.
At the bottom of all of this, yes, it's sustainable. Yes, it's good. Do you truly believe that local food tastes better? If I get a piece of fish from you, or I go to an upscale restaurant not on the water where the fish had to be shipped in, can I truly tell a difference?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. For one thing, there's nothing that really beats the freshness. Like we don't get much that's been out of the water for more than 24 or 48 hours. Most of the fish that you get outside of 100 miles from here has probably been out of the water for 5 days. If not more. People always think the shelf life on fish is 3 days, but that's the shelf life on fish once you finally get it. It actually has a very long shelf life. And then there's just the treatment of the fish is totally different, just the way we deal with things. Yeah, I think you could definitely tell the difference. And it's like anything else. It's really very much similar to a vegetable. You pick it, you handle it well, and you eat it. It's going to be a lot better than something that's been tossed around a truck or shipped to China, cut up, frozen, and sent back. That's the best one.
What items are shipped to China, frozen, and sent back?
Almost every piece of squid that we ingest in America.
Really?
Yeah. I actually oftentimes can't get squid because all the squid that they're catching just miles from here is going to a processor, getting shipped to China on a boat, and then processed and then shipped back in little frozen blocks.
How do you cook some things that make them wonderful?
The general way that we cook all of our fish is that we dry it. First of all, we store everything dry. There's this idea that you have to store things on ice, which is the worst thing you can do to a fish.
Explain that to me.
Well, when you take something from salt water that is at a certain salinity, and then you take and submerge it in ice, the salt starts to leach out, and now it can have bacteria can grow where bacteria could not grow before. So the fish starts to spoil immediately. Secondly, you're making the skin wet. So when you go to try to cook it, it doesn't get crispy. So we dry everything. All of our fish is stored in a refrigeration on racks, or it's hung to dry so that the skin gets super crispy. The flesh gets more kind of just like when you dry age a steak, gets a little more dense, a little more meaty. And so we cook everything pretty much on a plancha. So we don't really do a lot of different cooking methods with fish. It's mostly all a la plancha. Plancha is a Spanish cooking method, like a thick piece of steel over a fire normally. We have a propane one, but it's just super hard steel, super hot, really crispy, and we baste it, butter and herbs. And that's kind of the preparation on most of the fish that we serve hot. Then what we do with it, it's obviously, sauces and other magic. But the fish itself is just really well prepared and it's really well handled.
What about shellfish?
Shellfish, we use scallops, we use mussels, and we use slipper limpets quite a bit.
What's that third one?
Slipper. It's called a slipper limpet.
Oh, of course it is. What's a slipper limpet?
It's also called a slipper snail. If you've ever been on the beach and you find those little shells, they're like oval shaped and they have a little kind of piece that covers half of the inside.
For the sake of this conversation, sure.
Yeah, that's a slipper. That's a slipper limpet. And so it's a little sea snail, saltwater snail, that they basically grow over clam beds. So they're kind of accidentally harvested, or you have to dig through them to get to the clams if you're clamming. But they're delicious. You can eat them raw right out of the shell. You can steam them. We serve them like escargot, with in the shell with like the escargot butter, and put in pasta, like lots of stuff.
It's funny. There is a lot of shellfish that we don't necessarily know about. When my wife and I were last visiting Spain, we had barnacles.
Yeah.
It was like mini lobster meat.
Totally. Yeah. One of the big fishermen I used to work with until he moved, his family's been fishing here since the 1600s. And he basically said, 99% of what's in the ocean is edible and delicious. There's almost nothing that you can pull out of the ocean that you can't eat.
You use invasive species?
Yeah.
Explain that.
There's a little debate on that, but the one that we use that's not debatable is green crabs. That's 100% invasive. They came over on the boats with the Europeans many years ago in the bilge, and they've completely kind of taken over the ecosystem. They're really bad for local sea life. They can eat, I think one green crab can eat up to 40 baby oysters a day.
So can I.
Yeah, exactly. The big ones.
Yeah.
And so they're just kind of everywhere, and the warming water is making it worse. So they're now kind of overrunning areas that they weren't in before. Maine is about to have a huge green crab problem. They're very worried about it. And so they're delicious. It's funny. I've been looking for green crabs for years since I worked for Robuchon. When he came to town, part of my job was to get all the stuff, and they wanted crabs. And in Europe, they're the crab. They're a delicacy. They're the best crab to make stock with. And he was looking for green crabs, and nobody had them. So it was just in my mind of like, green crabs, why not? And then I went fishing one day with a guy up here, and he was using green crabs for bait. I'm like, what do you mean? They're everywhere. Why can't I get them? And, the answer was they're bait. They're not food. You can't get them for food.
So how do you get them for food now?
I finally found someone who was willing to harvest them for food. All you got to do is harvest them and sell them. It's just that they're usually treated as bait. They're dead, or they're frozen, or they're poor quality, not food quality, essentially. But now actually I work with greencrab.org quite a lot to try to develop markets for these things.
Everybody's got a lobbying group, including green crabs. Fascinating.
Yes.
Another invasive species that you...
Well, the other ones that we talk about, I think they're invasive. People don't think of it that way, but like black bass, for instance, is natural to here, but used to be very rare. Used to be like almost a delicacy fish in the Northeast, and it's more of a mid-Atlantic fish. But now it's moving into this area. Some people credit it with some of the decimation of the lobster populations here. Now there's black bass everywhere. And unfortunately, the regulations haven't moved along with that. But there's a lot of fish that are going to be coming up from the south that are probably maybe should be considered invasive. I don't know. Maybe it's just a new ecosystem.
Because the water is warming?
Yeah, because the water is warming. So
what's moving the lobster trade inevitably up to Canada, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. That's one of the reasons we don't use lobster.
Well, everybody else is now selling a lobster roll.
Yeah, none of them use lobster. They all use bags of lobster. It's a little different.
You've chosen
a
livelihood that is harder than hell. It's physically demanding. The finances can be tenuous. Your profit margin is tiny. Why the hell do it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't recommend it to anybody. If anyone ever asks me, why do that? Why run a marathon? Who knows? For me, it's special. And it's not so much about the food. The food part of it, to me, is the least special part, quite frankly, of being in the restaurant business.
So what's the good part?
The people. I think for me, like, what's really special is seeing a staff come together. I think it's building a place that is a special place to work. And we use sustainable in that sense as well in all of our marketing. But the idea that this is a sustainable environment where people can come and have a career, they can have a job, they can feed their families, they can be in a place that's nice to be in, that takes care of them, that we can give back to the community, that we have this like ability, I think, as a chef to get your tentacles into a lot of different areas. You know, we can control the food supply in a way that we can influence the people harvesting the food. We can influence people buying the food. I think that these are things that are just worth doing, and it feels good to do it.
Are you an ecological do-gooder? Are you waving your arms in front of traffic that cows emit methane and we shouldn't eat meat?
No, not at all. Yeah, you know, one thing that really drives me crazy in this sphere, whether it's ecology or just in farm to table or whatever, is people who poke holes. I think that for me, I think my idea is I want to work with the best people that I can who are doing the best job that I can, but nobody can do it perfectly. Nobody can drive an electric car, recycle everything, use no plastic, eat all the good things. It's impossible. We can as a restaurant. You can as a human being.
While you're making that list, if you could negotiate peace in some troubled areas, that would help too.
Exactly. I mean, the world's a mess. So I just think for me, it's what can we just do a little better tomorrow? That's really it.
What do you think of the state of food and dining in America today?
It's weird. I think it's still in utter flux from the pandemic. I think the pandemic was such a reckoning for restaurants. Restaurants, I think, for me, my personal thing coming out of the pandemic was, this is ridiculous. We're not going to operate like this anymore.
This being what? What was ridiculous?
The environment of restaurants, it was a simultaneous thing happening in restaurants, and then started in the 90s, where it was, as far as the food goes, and the quality was a race to the top, and the costs were a race to the bottom. So it was basically like, how good a food can I get you for the lowest possible price? And it was like, basically came out of chefs that worked for great chefs like me, who were then trying to go out on their own and basically selling, I can do what I did at Boulé, but for way less, essentially. And then people just started wanting that. And you can't do that. It's impossible to do both things, to do great food for cheap. It's just not possible.
Which gets us into the conversation about what, for example, servers should be paid. How do you feel about ongoing attempts nationally to increase the wage paid restaurant workers?
People who are putting that out must not be interested in helping restaurant workers, because that would completely destroy. So right now, servers are the ones that are mostly keeping those laws from being passed. That's what you have to understand. Like, we had that issue in Connecticut where they had a bill. Every year the bill comes up, every single year, every year it gets defeated. But what ends up defeating it is literally people who get paid sub-minimum wage as servers going to the Capitol and testifying that this is going to ruin my career.
In what way?
Because right now they make a lot of money. So a server might make, I think here it's like $8 an hour instead of $15 for their minimum wage.
As the tip minimum wage, yeah.
Yeah, but their take-home wage is actually $35, if not more.
Your customers tip well.
All customers tip well. Half the time it's like, almost 18 to 20% is kind of the standard at this point. The reality is, for us, the challenge is to pay managers enough to want to be managers.
To get off the floor, right.
Yeah. You want me to work 40 hours a week for $10,000 a year less than I could make in 30 hours a week? Are you kidding me?
Are we getting, I hate this word, are we getting better as food consumers? To me, there's this bizarre dichotomy, which is all this talk about eating well, eating local, eating organic, and I have some issues with organic being the standard. But we say that, and yet McDonald's ain't going out of business. And Impossible burgers are not selling like they were predicted to sell. Where the heck are we really as a dining culture?
I think it's hard to say. There's so many different dining cultures and so many different reasons for dining. I think that going to McDonald's, and I'm guilty of going to McDonald's occasionally, is not for dining. It's for eating. And that's totally different. I think as a dining culture, people definitely want to do the right thing. And I think the question is, do they want to pay for the right thing? And, when you serve somebody some food and then you tell them after the fact, actually, this is like super sustainable and it's organic and it's wonderful. They're like, oh, that's great. Wonderful. But if you tell them that beforehand and it's $10 or $15 more than you can get it across the street and it's not that way, they don't really care that much. So it's tricky.
What's ahead? both for the country in terms of food and for you?
For us, we're opening another restaurant next year, which is going to be a sustainable fish fry, kind of a takeout thing, but the same kind of methodology that we apply to all of our fish, which is going to be really exciting. And then for the country, I don't know. I mean, it's depressing to think about big picture. I think that's why everyone's so upset. If you could just focus a little more on your backyard and a little less on the whole country, maybe you might be better off. I think what's ahead for here and the local fishing industry and the local ecosystem is the future is bright. Everyone's working towards the same goal, and we're going to make some headway.
Well, Chef, keep on trucking. Keep on doing it. Congratulations on your James Beard Award.
Thank you.
And thank you for chatting with me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Chef David Standridge of the Shipwright's Daughter in Mystic, Connecticut. I'm David Page, and I'll see you next time on Culinary Characters Unlocked.